You might recognize this building. That's the Lumen Industries headquarters from Severance. What you probably don't know is what it used to be. This was Bell Labs' home Dell, and the monument out front, the one shaped like a transistor, marks something that was invented 20 miles north of here on December 23, 1947. Every one of these exists because of what three men did in a single room in New Jersey in about 10 minutes 79 years ago. The 20th century pivoted on a bench in a basement. This is where it started. "20 miles north of Holmdel is the building where it actually happened. Bell Laboratories, Murray Hill, New Jersey. 20 miles west of Manhattan, set back from a quiet suburban road. It looked like a small college campus. It wasn't. It was the research arm of AT&T, the American telephone monopoly, and inside it was arguably the densest concentration of scientific talent on Earth. AT&T was a regulated monopoly, stable profits, predictable profits, and a portion of those profits was, by design, funneled into research with no deadline. The man who decided what to do with that money was Mervyn Kelly, Bell Labs research chief. Kelly was an engineer's engineer, but he thought like a gambler, and in 1945, he made a very specific bet. Kelly believed the next revolution in communications would be solid state, no moving parts, no glowing filaments, and he built the building to produce it. There was a corridor on the first floor of Murray Hill that ran 700 feet, nearly the length of 2 football fields. Physicists had offices on that corridor, so did chemists, so did metallurgists and engineers. You could not walk from your office to the cafeteria without colliding with someone who was thinking about your problem from a completely different angle. In the fall of 1945, Kelly put a 35-year-old physicist named William Shockley in charge of a new solid-state group. Shockley recruited a quiet theorist from the Midwest named John Bardeen and an experimentalist from the Pacific Northwest named Walter Brattain. 2 years later, those 3 names would be tied to the most important invention of the century. Every long-distance phone call in America in 1945 traveled along a copper line, and every few dozen miles that signal got weaker and needed to be amplified. The device that did the amplifying was the vacuum tube. Vacuum tubes worked, but barely. They were the size of a light bulb. They ran hot. They burned out constantly. Scale up the American phone network, and the math broke. The tubes alone would have needed their own power plants. Kelly's bet was this: somewhere inside a class of materials called semiconductors, germanium, silicon, there was a way to move electrons around a tiny crystal that would do the job of a vacuum tube with none of the heat, the size, or the fragility. Shockley had an idea in 1945, a thing he called a field effect amplifier. He was convinced it would work. He spent 2 years on it. It did not work. By the summer of 1947, Shockley's group had been chasing the solid-state amplifier for 2 years. They had almost nothing to show for it. John Bardeen was 39 years old, born in Madison, Wisconsin, the son of a university dean. He was famously quiet, so quiet that colleagues sometimes forgot he was in the room. He did his best thinking in equations, and he did not like to be rushed. Bardeen would, much later, become the only person in history to win the Nobel Prize in Physics twice. He was the theorist on the team. Walter Brattain was Bardeen's opposite, loud, funny, raised on a ranch in Washington state. Brattain had what Bell Labs people called the best pair of hands in the building. He could assemble an experiment that no one else could get to work. While Bardeen reasoned about it on a chalkboard, Brattain built it on a bench. The two of them, it turned out, were perfectly paired. They shared an office. Their boss, William Shockley, was 37, a brilliant theoretical physicist, already ambitious, already difficult. He led the group, but he traveled often and he spent less and less time at the bench. In the fall of 1947, with Shockley mostly out of the building, Bardeen had the insight that unlocked everything. He realized that electrons were getting trapped on the surface of the germanium crystal, that the surface itself was acting as a shield, blocking the effect Shockley had been chasing. If they could get underneath that surface, with the right kind of contact, they might have an amplifier. Through November and into December of 1947, Bardeen and Brattain, in Lab 1E455 at Murray Hill, worked their way toward the device. They were within days of it. They just didn't know yet. December 23, 1947, the afternoon before Christmas Eve. In a basement room at Murray Hill, Walter Brattain laid out the final version of the device. It was absurdly small. A slab of germanium about the size of a thumbnail. A triangular plastic wedge with two narrow strips of gold foil glued to its edges, pressed down onto the germanium surface. The two gold contacts spaced 0.02 of an inch apart. A paperclip would have dwarfed it. Bardeen and Brattain invited a small group of colleagues and managers down to the lab. They connected the device into an audio circuit, a microphone on one end, a loudspeaker on the other. Brattain spoke into the microphone, and the room heard his voice come back out of the speaker, louder, amplified by a factor of about 18. No glass, no filament, no heat. A piece of metal on crystal the size of a paperclip, doing what vacuum tubes had needed the better part of a century to do. They called it a transfer resistor. Within months, they would shorten that to transistor. Bardeen drove home one evening that December. He did not make a speech. He did not call a press conference. When his wife Jane asked him how his day had been, he's reported to have said, quote, "We discovered something today." Then he went to bed. The 20th century had just pivoted in a basement in New Jersey, and the man who did it closed his eyes and went to sleep. The device first amplified on December 16th, and William Shockley wasn't in the room. He'd led the group, but the breakthrough had happened without him. A week later, he stood at the formal demonstration, watching a triumph that wasn't his, and it wounded him. He tried to get his name added to the patent, alone. But Bell Labs lawyers found his own writings uncomfortably close to a 1925 patent by an Austrian-born physicist named Julius Lilienfeld, and quietly left his name off the document entirely. So Shockley got on a train to Chicago, checked into a hotel room, and for 4 weeks, while his colleagues celebrated Christmas and New Year, he filled notebook after notebook, alone, out of pure competitive rage. On January 23, 1948, exactly 1 month after the basement demo, Shockley had the junction transistor, layered like a sandwich, more reliable, easier to manufacture, the version that would actually power the next 50 years. The team never recovered. Shockley blocked Bardeen and Brattain from the junction work. Brattain asked to be transferred. In 1951, Bardeen quietly left Bell Labs for the University of Illinois, where, 21 years later, he would win a second Nobel Prize, this time for superconductivity. The three men who invented the transistor together did not really speak again, but the device they had launched was already loose in the world. On June 30, 1948, Bell Labs held a press conference in New York and unveiled the transistor to the world. Bell Labs Director of Research, Ralph Baun, held up a 100-time scale cutaway model and explained what it did. Most of the press yawned. Newspapers buried it on inside pages. The consumer market had no use for a delicate lab curiosity that cost more than a television set. But there was one customer in the room who understood immediately what it meant, and that customer was also in New Jersey. 40 miles down the road, at the U.S. Army Signal Corps Laboratories at Fort Monmouth, the Cold War was already on. The Army needed smaller, lighter, tougher field radios, and vacuum tubes couldn't cut it. Fort Monmouth became one of the earliest serious customers for the Transistor, pouring defense money into Bell Labs and its licensees, and in doing so, de-risking the entire technology. A generation later, the largely transistorized field radio that came out of that pipeline, the ANPRC-25, would be called by General Creighton Abrams, quote, "the single most important tactical field item in Vietnam." You can still walk onto a piece of that story today. The old Signal Corps radar base at Camp Evans in Wall Township, an outpost of Fort Monmouth itself, is now home to Info Age, a volunteer-run campus of museums on the original ground where the Army once tracked enemy aircraft and bounced radar off the moon. Inside one of those museums, the Vintage Computer Federation, or VCF, sit examples of the earliest transistor-era technology, alongside the story of how the Signal Corps helped move transistor research out of Bell Labs and into real-world military and communications use. Same soil, same story, different century. Fort Monmouth didn't just help launch the transistor. Fort Monmouth is about to invent something of its own. But that is the story of another episode. In December of 1956, in Stockholm, William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain shared the Nobel Prize in Physics. It was the first time in years the three of them had stood on the same stage. By most accounts, they did not quite look at each other. But the bigger thing that happened to the transistor in 1956 was not the Nobel. It was a federal courtroom. To settle a 7-year antitrust case, AT&T signed a consent decree forcing it to license every patent in its vault, more than 7,000 of them, including the transistor, to any American company that asked, for a nominal fee. Intel co-founder Gordon Moore would later call it one of the most important developments for the commercial semiconductor industry. In one signature, the moat dissolved. Anyone could build a transistor now, and a lot of people were about to. Later that year, William Shockley left Bell Labs and opened Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory in Mountain View. He recruited 8 of the sharpest young PhDs in the country. On September 18, 1957, all 8 walked into his office and resigned together. History would call them the Traitorous Eight. 12 blocks away, they founded Fairchild Semiconductor. 11 years later, in 1968, 2 of those 8, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore, left Fairchild and started Intel. Eugene Kleiner co-founded Kleiner Perkins, the firm that funded much of what came next, and Fairchild's alumni went on to seed AMD, National Semiconductor, and dozens more. Silicon Valley, the place and the culture, did not originate in California. It was a diaspora. The seed that Shockley carried west was germanium dust from a basement laboratory in Murray Hill. Silicon Valley came from New Jersey. California scaled it, but Jersey built it. One transistor on a bench in 1947. Today, Apple's M3 Max processor packs about 92 billion transistors onto a single chip the size of a postage stamp. The descendants of that device have shrunk by a factor of about 100 million and gotten roughly 1 billion times cheaper. Every phone, every server, every car, every pacemaker, every pixel on every streaming screen on Earth rides on the thing those 3 men built in the winter of 1947. So come back to the ground. The sculpture in Holmdel is still there. The mirrored Bell Works building, once Bell Labs Palace on a hill, is still standing, reborn in 2013 as Bell Works, a 2 million square foot metro burb filled with startups, restaurants, and a quarter-mile atrium open to the public. And 10 miles south of it, on the same Fort Monmouth soil where the Signal Corps once helped launch the transistor, Netflix is now pouring concrete, a $1 billion 12-soundstage East Coast production hub. Phase 1 opens in 2027. The ground that made the thing that makes the shows is now making the studio where the shows get made. That is not coincidence. That is how this place works. Every layer of the computer age was built inside a 20-mile strip of New Jersey, and we're going to walk through all of them, one layer at a time. But what you just saw was a transistor as an amplifier, a voice 18 times louder. To build a computer, you need a switch. On, off, 1, 0. Next time on the Jersey stack, the switch.